The sheets on his side of the bed were cold when I reached over at 2:17 in the morning. Not the kind of cold that comes from someone stepping out to use the bathroom. The deep cold. The kind that meant he'd been gone for a while. I lay there for a second, staring at the ceiling, listening. The house was completely silent except for the hum of the refrigerator downstairs. My husband was a light sleeper. He always said the same about me. So I told myself maybe he'd gone to get water. Maybe he couldn't sleep. I checked my phone. No text. Nothing. I got up. The hallway was dark, but there was a faint glow coming from under the garage door at the bottom of the stairs. I thought that was strange. We never used the garage at night. We barely used it at all. It was mostly boxes from when we moved in 3 years ago, a few tools, my old bicycle leaning against the far wall. I pushed the door open slowly. The overhead light was on. My husband's truck was gone. The big side door that opened to the driveway was rolled halfway up. I stood there in my socks on the cold concrete and something, I don't know what to call it, instinct, maybe, or dread, settled in my chest like a stone dropping to the bottom of a well. I grabbed my keys off the hook by the kitchen door, pulled on the coat that was hanging over the back of a chair, and I followed him. I want to be honest about something. I almost didn't. Part of me said, turn around, go back upstairs, you're being paranoid. We'd been married for 4 years. He coached youth soccer on weekends. He remembered my mother's birthday when I forgot it. Whatever this was, there was probably a reasonable explanation. But my feet kept moving. I drove with my headlights off for the first 2 blocks. I know how that sounds. I've thought about it 100 times since. How clearly some part of me already knew this wasn't innocent, even before I knew anything at all. I spotted his truck turning right onto Denison Road, heading toward the edge of town where the old rail yard used to be. That whole stretch is mostly warehouses now, a few shuttered businesses, an auto salvage place that I don't think actually runs anymore. Nobody goes out there at night. There's no reason to. I stayed far enough back that he wouldn't see my headlights. I killed the engine and coasted to a stop about 50 yards behind where he'd parked, in the shadow of a chain-link fence. He got out of the truck. He pulled something from the truck bed. Even in the dark, I could see it was a bag. One of those large duffel bags, the kind people take to the gym or on weekend trips. He was struggling with it. Whatever was inside was heavy, because he dragged it more than carried it, and when he set it down to readjust his grip, I heard a sound, a muffled sound. My hands went to my mouth. He picked the bag back up and walked it toward the storm drain channel that runs along the back of that whole industrial stretch. A concrete ravine, maybe 15 feet deep, that carries runoff toward the river in heavy rain. In the summer, it's completely dry. That night, there had been rain for 2 days straight. I could hear the water from where I was sitting. He dropped the bag over the edge. I was already calling 911 before I understood what my own body was doing. I remember the dispatcher's voice, calm and professional, asking me to describe my location, and I was telling her the cross streets, but I was also opening my car door because I just could not, sit there and do nothing. The 911 dispatcher told me to stay in my vehicle. I didn't. I ran to the edge of the channel and looked down. The current was moving fast. The bag was there, caught against a concrete pillar, moving with the water, and there was a sound coming from it. Not loud, barely audible over the rush of water, but it was there. I climbed down. I don't know how I didn't break both my ankles. I half slid, half fell down the embankment, grabbed the bag by one of its handles, and pulled it toward me. The zipper was tied shut with a bungee cord wrapped twice around the outside. I yanked it off with my hands shaking so badly I could barely function. Inside was my father. His hands were bound. There was tape over his mouth. He was conscious, barely, but his eyes were open and they found my face, and I will never, for the rest of my life, forget the look in them. Terror first, then something else. Relief, maybe, or just recognition, just knowing he wasn't alone. I pulled the tape off his mouth and he gasped and said my name. The police arrived 6 minutes later. My father was 61 years old. He'd retired early from his job managing logistics for a regional trucking company, lived alone in the house I grew up in about 40 minutes outside of town, and spent his evenings watching old baseball games and feeding the family of raccoons that had taken up residence under his back porch. He was not a man with enemies. He was not a man with secrets. He was the most aggressively ordinary person I have ever loved. When the paramedics got him stable and let me ride in the ambulance with him, the first thing he said to me, in a voice still ragged from the tape and the cold water, and whatever had happened before I found him, was, "Don't tell your husband." I didn't understand what he meant. I thought he was confused, disoriented. He'd been through something traumatic, and his mind was scrambling. I held his hand and told him everything was going to be okay, and I told him not to worry about anything right now. But the whole drive to the hospital, those 3 words kept circling in my head. Don't tell your husband. The police found my husband 2 hours later at a motel off the highway. He hadn't gone home. He'd checked in under a name that wasn't his, paid cash, and was apparently sitting on the edge of the bed watching television when they knocked on the door. He came with them without a fight. That's what the detective told me the next morning. Detective Quinlan, a woman in her mid-40s with reading glasses she kept taking on and off, sat across from me in a small room at the hospital and walked me through what they knew. My husband, whose name was, I still find it strange to type, whose name I still can't write without my jaw tightening, had called my father 2 weeks earlier. He'd told him there was a family emergency, that I was in trouble, and that he needed to meet somewhere private. My father, who trusted him completely, who had been to every birthday dinner and Thanksgiving and Easter for 4 years, who had taught him to fish 2 summers ago on the lake behind my aunt's property. My father drove to meet him. What happened next took me a long time to piece together, because my father didn't want to tell me, and my husband, through his attorney, wasn't talking. But eventually, between what my father shared and what the investigation uncovered, I got the full picture. 3 years earlier, 1 year before my husband and I got married, he had borrowed $140,000, not from a bank, not through any legitimate channel. He had borrowed it from my father, except my father had never lent him anything. The signatures on the 2 loan documents that my husband produced, the documents he had been using for 3 years to justify why he had transferred money from a joint account we'd opened early in our relationship and then quietly closed, were forgeries. He had practiced my father's signature. I know this because 6 days after my father was pulled from that storm drain channel, I went back to our house to collect some of my things, and I found a yellow legal pad in the drawer of his home office desk, tucked under a stack of old utility bills covered in handwriting practice. My father's name, over and over, slightly different each time, like someone learning to copy a signature they hadn't quite mastered yet. I sat on the floor of that office for a long time. The money wasn't the only thing. This is the part I keep coming back to, the part that took the longest to process, because the money I could almost frame as desperation. People do desperate things. People make choices that destroy them. I know that. I understand that the world is complicated. But the money wasn't the only thing. My husband had a second phone. The police found it in the truck, in a magnetic case stuck to the underside of the wheel well. On that phone were 2 years' worth of messages to a woman I will call by her first name only. Serena. Serena was not a coworker. Serena was not an old friend. Serena was a woman my husband had been seeing since approximately 8 months into our marriage, and she lived in a rental apartment 20 minutes from our house, and she had, 14 months ago, had his child. A daughter, 9 months old at the time all of this came out. I found out about her, the baby, I mean, not from the detective, and not from my husband, but from Serena herself, who showed up at the hospital 2 days after my father was admitted and asked to speak with me. A nurse came to find me in the family waiting room and said, "There was a woman at the front desk asking for me by name, and I went down, and she was standing near the entrance with the baby on her hip. She looked exhausted. She looked like someone who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had finally decided to set it down, even if setting it down meant dropping it on somebody else's feet. She said, 'I didn't know about you. Not until about 4 months ago, and when I found out, I tried to get him to tell you. He said he would. He kept saying he would, and then I found out what he did to your father, and I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I don't know exactly how long we stood there. I know the baby kept looking at me with these enormous dark eyes, completely unbothered, reaching for the zipper on my jacket. I said, 'What's her name?' Serena said, 'Ruby.' My husband's attorney tried, in the first weeks after his arrest, to frame everything as a misunderstanding. The loan documents, he suggested, may have reflected a verbal agreement that my father had simply forgotten. The incident at the storm drain, he suggested, was a miscommunication, a panicked response to a confrontation that had escalated unexpectedly. The medical examiner's report put a firm end to that particular narrative. My father had 2 cracked ribs, a fractured wrist, and bruising consistent with being restrained with zip ties for an extended period. He had been struck, the report concluded, before being placed in the bag. My husband did not act alone. This took a while to establish. But the second arrest came 5 weeks after the first. A man my husband had known since college, someone I had met exactly once at a work event and promptly forgotten, whose name appeared in phone records as the person my husband had called 11 times in the 48 hours before my father disappeared. He was the one who had driven the second vehicle that night. He was the one who had helped carry the bag. They were both charged. I won't go through the legal details here. The trial lasted 9 days, and I sat in that courtroom for all of it, and I watched my husband look everywhere except at me. But I will say this. The jury was out for less than 3 hours. I want to talk about what happened after. People ask me sometimes, my friends, my therapist, my mother, who flew in from where she'd retired to in Tucson and stayed with me for 6 weeks. They ask me how I'm doing, and I understand that what they're really asking is, are you okay, and do you hate him? And how do you live in a world where someone you slept next to for 4 years was capable of this? The honest answer changes depending on the day. There are mornings I wake up and feel something I can only describe as clarity, like the version of my life that had been blurry for a long time has finally sharpened into focus. I was not crazy. I was not imagining things. I was having coffee at the counter. The low-level unease I had felt for the better part of 2 years, the times I would ask him something simple and something in his answer would feel slightly off, the way he sometimes looked at his phone and then put it face down with just a fraction too much casualness. None of that was paranoia. None of that was me being difficult or anxious or oversensitive. I was right. I just didn't know yet what I was right about. And there are other mornings, fewer now, but still, where I sit in the kitchen with my coffee and the grief of it hits me completely fresh, like it happened yesterday. Not grief for him, exactly. Grief for the version of my life I thought I had. The version where I was building something real with someone who meant it. My father spent 3 weeks in the hospital and 4 more at a rehabilitation facility for his wrist. He is fully recovered now. He still feeds the raccoons. He calls me every Sunday morning, always at the same time, always starting with some observation about the weather or the baseball scores, never leading with the hard thing, because that is simply who he is. About 2 months after the trial ended, I drove out to his house on a Saturday afternoon. We sat on the back porch and drank iced tea and didn't say much for a while. The raccoons came out around 4 o'clock, the mother and her 3 kits, scrounging around in the dead leaves near the fence, he said, eventually. I didn't want to worry you. That's why I said don't tell him. I'd had a feeling about him for a while. Nothing I could name, just a feeling. I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" He said, "Because you loved him." And I thought maybe I was wrong. I thought about that for a long time afterward. I thought about how many people in my life, my father, me, maybe even Serena in her own way, had been quietly carrying the weight of a feeling they couldn't prove, dismissing it because the alternative seemed too large to hold. I still live in the same city. I moved to a smaller apartment on the north side, closer to a coffee shop I like and a running trail that goes along the river. I kept the dog, a 3-year-old beagle mix named Georgie, who was, to be clear, my dog first, though my husband used to act like they had some special bond, which now I suspect was also performance. Georgie adjusted to the new apartment in approximately 45 minutes. Dogs are, I think, better at starting over than people are. Serena and I are not friends, exactly, but we have each other's numbers. Ruby turned 1 in the spring. I sent a card. I don't know what our relationship will look like going forward, or what's right, or what's fair. I'm trying not to make decisions about that from a place of anger or hurt, because both of those things are still very much present, and I've learned to be cautious about choices made while you're still inside the fire. What I know is this: my father is alive. The truth came out, and I am standing in my own life, in an apartment I chose, with a dog who loves me uncritically, and a coffee shop 2 blocks away, and a running trail where I go in the early mornings before the rest of the world wakes up, and I breathe in the cold air, and I feel, not fine, not yet, maybe not ever in the way I was before, but real. I feel real, and I feel like myself, and some days that is everything.